Prince Andrew was totally different. He could fly off the handle at the smallest thing. He would be abusive. He would shout. He would swear. So we had a particular issue with Prince Andrew.
Quiet murmurs once limited to hidden hallways have finally exploded into the public, dragging decades of carefully concealed disorder into full view. At high-end gatherings where royalty mingled with the upper class, witnesses say Prince Andrew's behavior wasn't just inappropriate. It was shocking, relentless, and humiliating even for those who attempted to excuse him. From unsettling demands to moments that left entire rooms stunned, his long history of misconduct can no longer be covered up. But what truly went on at those parties, and why are insiders finally speaking out after so many years? The prince who never learned the meaning of the word no. It started, like so many accounts about him do, with something that looked harmless at first glance. 72 teddy bears were arranged with military-like precision across Prince Andrew's bed deep inside Buckingham Palace. Anyone else might have laughed at the sight, but the staff didn't. They had been given a laminated photo showing the exact sequence, angle, and placement each stuffed bear needed to have. If even one was slightly out of order, the quiet halls would erupt with his furious yelling. Staff members learned to follow the pattern word for word, as if the teddy bears were ceremonial guards instead of childhood toys. It was a glimpse into a mindset that demanded the world adjust itself to his comfort. But this behavior didn't suddenly appear. It had been forming for years, long before adulthood handed Prince Andrew titles and advantages. In the late 1970s, when he was still a teenager, whispers began circulating among people who encountered him. One writer described a bizarre night at a country house gathering. Several young women were asleep in their room, the house silent and dark, when suddenly the door flew open at 2 a.m. There stood Prince Andrew, claiming a ghost had scared him and insisting he needed to share their bed. They threw him out immediately. It was a foolish and intrusive act, but also a revealing one. Even at 17, Prince Andrew moved through life as if everyone else would simply go along with whatever he wanted. A similar memory surfaced from another event, this time during a calm morning routine. A young woman, barely awake, was brushing her teeth in her ensuite bathroom when Prince Andrew walked right in without knocking. Instead of apologizing, he gave her an impromptu lecture on proper brushing technique, as though barging into her private space gave him authority to correct her. The moment wasn't charming or quirky. It was unnerving, a reminder that boundaries mattered only when they were his own. These stories drifted through the years like scattered warnings, small hints of a larger pattern that would intensify with age. People who encountered Prince Andrew repeatedly said the same thing. He behaved as if women existed to amuse him, respond to him, and fit into his world without complaint. His humor often came wrapped in thin disrespect, his attention in demands, and his presence in entitlement. What makes these accounts memorable isn't just the behavior itself but the environment that allowed it to continue behind royal walls. Prince Andrew's eccentricities were tolerated, even catered to. Staff learned to tiptoe around irritation. Friends learned to roll their eyes and ignore it. The public rarely heard a whisper, allowing these habits to flourish in the shadows of palaces, private homes, and social circles far more willing to shrug than confront. By the time Prince Andrew became a public adult figure, the signs were no longer subtle. His treatment of women especially seemed driven by a single assumption: his feelings came first. If something amused him, everyone else was expected to join in. If something bothered him, the mood changed instantly. Some remembered sudden temper shifts over trivial things like a misplaced item or a mildly inconvenient comment. Others recalled moments when Prince Andrew acted as if every room he entered became his stage and everyone in it became his audience. The teddy bears, strangely enough, became one of the clearest symbols of that lifelong mindset. They weren't arranged out of sentimental attachment but control. The laminated card sitting in the bedroom drawer wasn't to protect childhood memories, it was an instruction sheet for obedience. Staff had to follow it because Prince Andrew expected the world to align perfectly with his preferences. What connects these incidents isn't the oddness of each moment but the consistency behind them. The boy who walked into girls' bedrooms uninvited became the man who demanded his stuffed animals be laid out like ceremonial relics. The teenager who lectured a stranger in her own bathroom grew into an adult who erupted when things didn't appear exactly the way he wanted. Year after year, the pattern repeated. Boundaries were suggestions, not rules. The settings changed: country manners, royal homes, private suites, but Prince Andrew's behavior stayed the same. And as time went on, those early stories, once dismissed as harmless anecdotes, began to look more like warning signs pointing to a larger truth. They revealed a man shaped not by accountability but by non-stop reinforcement of privilege, someone who confused indulgence with affection and entitlement with authority. The image of the 72 teddy bears is more than a quirky detail. It's a quiet, unsettling reminder of a life lived inside a bubble where no one ever said no and where the simplest objects became symbols of a deeper, long-standing pattern built on intrusion, expectation, and the belief that the world must always rearrange itself to Prince Andrew's liking. So if the world always bowed to Prince Andrew's wishes, what hidden realities did those closest to the monarchy witness about his untouchable, domineering behavior? Shadows behind the palace walls. Long before whispers solidified into stories, there was already a silent understanding among those who worked closest to the monarchy. Prince Andrew moved through life differently, not just because he was born into status, but because he carried himself as though that privilege gave him permission to unsettle, humiliate, or overpower anyone in his way. His position as the Queen's favored son shaped the atmosphere around him, creating a quiet tension that followed him into every room, hallway, and event. Those who served in royal households remember the unease that surfaced whenever Prince Andrew's footsteps echoed down a corridor. Even in the late 1990s, during weekends at country homes across England, staff quietly warned one another, not because they feared normal mistakes, since mistakes happen everywhere, but because Prince Andrew often responded as if errors were personal offenses. A napkin folded slightly off, or a tray delivered 60 seconds late, could trigger an outburst aimed at young staff barely old enough to have finished school. What disturbed many wasn't just the shouting but the unpredictability. One moment, Prince Andrew might walk through a sitting room with forced politeness. The next, he might turn a harmless exchange into a humiliating scene. Former guests and household workers described these moments with a mix of disbelief and resignation. They say his antics weren't the playful pranks of a man trying to ease a stiff royal atmosphere. They were intentional displays of dominance. At social events, especially those in sprawling country estates between 1995 and 2002, Prince Andrew was known to burst into rooms uninvited, often late at night. Some guests initially assumed it was innocent curiosity or a misguided attempt to socialize, but the pattern soon became unmistakable. Prince Andrew would throw open doors without knocking, scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. One woman recalled the unsettling moment when he paused in her doorway, looked her over like an object on a shelf, and remarked that he was shopping for entertainment, making it clear he expected no resistance. Quiet stories of Prince Andrew's so-called jokes spread among people who spent time around him. One incident happened during a private dinner where guests were enjoying a formal meal. A young woman carrying a plate of pâté walked by when Prince Andrew made an exaggerated show of sniffing the air. He announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that it smelled disgusting. When the woman bent down to check it, Prince Andrew pushed her face toward the plate, laughing as if he'd pulled off some grand comedic stunt. The room fell silent, but the silence wasn't confusion. It was fear of what might happen if anyone objected. He seemed to take satisfaction in creating those uncomfortable moments. At another house gathering, a woman woke to find Prince Andrew pointing a fire extinguisher directly at her face. Witnesses say Prince Andrew blasted rooms with it all night long, leaving behind chaos and screaming guests wherever he went, and he treated the fear he created as entertainment, lingering in doorways to watch people react before moving on to his next target. Younger staff members, especially teenage maids brought in from small towns to work in historic properties, often endured the worst of Prince Andrew's temper, and some of them were only 18, far from home, and dependent on their wages, which Andrew seemed to understand and exploit. A glass that wasn't polished perfectly or a task not finished at an impossible speed became justification for him to assert his authority, and his sharp, commanding voice would echo down the hallway as he scolded them for mistakes far too minor to merit such cruelty. During weekend gatherings, Prince Andrew introduced games that were supposed to appear playful but left many people feeling pressured, and guests remember being forced into long chains, marching through ornate rooms like participants in a children's parade. Others describe fruit-passing games where Prince Andrew demanded that they stand uncomfortably close, pushing personal boundaries while claiming it was just fun. His notorious mustard prank, where he squeezed mustard onto someone's face while pretending it was accidental, became a routine he performed again and again, laughing louder each time than anyone around him. Over years and across estates, a pattern became clear. Humiliation disguised as humor, intrusion masked as friendliness, and dominance hidden behind rank. Those who witnessed Prince Andrew's behavior describe these moments not as isolated events but part of a continuing environment where his royal status acted as a barrier against accountability. Behind the glittering facade of royal tradition, the stories reveal something far darker, showing that Prince Andrew tested limits not merely because he could but because no one was permitted to tell him he couldn't. Could his unchecked charm really hide a recklessness that would soon leave a mark far beyond palace walls, stretching the tolerance and expectations within royal circles? Prince Andrew, privilege, authority, and public scandal. Even before the world fully saw his conduct, Andrew had long carried a reputation for impulsive charm within palace halls, and the young prince, frequently praised for his status and connections, sometimes allowed that privilege to slip into carelessness, testing the patience of those around him. By 1981, this tendency wouldn't simply annoy courtiers but would leave an international impression. That year, Andrew was granted a vacation in Egypt, a lavish gesture of royal respect, and President Anwar Sadat personally offered the presidential jet, meant to symbolize goodwill between nations and honor for the British royal family. It should have been a diplomatic success, yet Andrew's actions quickly turned this courtesy into a disaster. Reports from the trip depict a vivid scene of excess and inappropriate behavior, and at one glamorous event in Cairo, witnesses say he jumped into a swimming pool fully dressed, pulling a female guest along with him in a display that stunned the attending elite. Laughter surrounded him, but not everyone found it amusing, as the woman surfaced humiliated in front of Egypt's high society while Andrew, apparently unaware of the seriousness of his behavior, treated the moment like an inside joke. It wasn't just poor judgment. It was a miscalculation on the global stage, showing a prince whose private impulses were already turning into public embarrassment. Behind closed doors, palace aides often struggled to manage Andrew's conduct, as his charm and status provided him a shield that made it difficult even for senior officials to set boundaries. But as his missteps increased, it became clear that his recklessness was no longer confined. These episodes, whether on high-profile foreign visits or social events closer to home, painted a picture of someone whose privilege appeared to excuse consequences. The Cairo incident was far from the only example, as friends, staff, and occasional journalists recall other events that mixed humor with embarrassment, where Andrew's confidence crossed lines, yet each account highlighted a rising conflict. The contrast between his personal sense of entitlement and the responsibilities tied to his royal position. Every laugh he drew abroad carried the weight of national image, and diplomats and hosts expecting behavior suited to a representative of the crown were frequently left shocked or uncomfortable. Andrew's behavior created ripple effects he likely never imagined, and while earlier incidents were brushed off as youthful mistakes, the ongoing pattern began to erode his reputation, turning what once seemed like private lapses in judgment into a public reminder of the thin line between charisma and impropriety. By the time foreign dignitaries shared their stories, it had shifted from casual anecdote to diplomatic embarrassment, one that followed him in reports and rumors for years. The 1981 Egypt trip, in particular, became symbolic of Andrew's complicated relationship with the world he moved in, defined by wealth, privilege, and unimaginable access, yet also marked by a lack of restraint that drew attention, often negative attention. Laughing at the wrong moments, pulling pranks that embarrassed others, and showing little regard for protocol turned what should have been simple holiday memories into cautionary tales. What might have been a routine royal visit became a symbol of unrestrained entitlement, remembered not for diplomatic goodwill but for awkward and even shocking moments on an international platform. When reflecting on Andrew's early adult years, a pattern becomes undeniable. He was someone who navigated power and prestige with ease but struggled to recognize the importance of his own actions, and each misstep, from over-the-top antics to questionable decisions, exposed the underlying tension in royal life, the distance between expectation and impulse, duty and self-indulgence. While the palace often smoothed over incidents behind closed doors, the broader world eventually caught glimpses of what insiders already understood. Andrew's conduct could be unpredictable and deeply consequential, and the fallout from these moments went far beyond social embarrassment, serving instead as reminders of how fragile reputation is and how delicate the balance between privilege and accountability can be. In the years after the Egyptian holiday, Andrew's public image swung between fascination and concern, with his actions examined not merely as the behavior of a young man but as the conduct of a prince whose every move reflected upon the monarchy itself, and in that sense, the Cairo incident and other episodes stood as early warnings, signaling how a life filled with extraordinary opportunities could be undermined by lapses in judgment that left behind a legacy both notable and controversial. But when those close to Prince Andrew witnessed his true behavior, what shocking effect did it have on the very legacy he hoped to preserve? Tales of arrogance and entitlement reveal that the room seemed to contract whenever Prince Andrew entered, not because of charm or magnetism, but because his presence demanded attention simply due to who he was, and those around him quickly realized that courtesy, respect, or basic decency became optional when dealing with someone whose world centered entirely on himself. His behavior was consistently dismissive, at times shockingly harsh, and always wrapped in an audacious sense of entitlement that made observers uneasy, and from casual contacts to longtime staff, no one escaped the sting of his arrogance. Even the smallest inconveniences became stages for Prince Andrew's privilege to display itself, and something as trivial as a stray golf ball rolling into the backyard could prompt him to summon police officers to retrieve it, as though the world existed solely to serve him. Staff were not colleagues but props expected to anticipate his demands and quietly endure humiliation, and social gatherings, dinners, and formal events routinely turned into uncomfortable demonstrations of power dynamics where his amusement came at the expense of anyone he deemed beneath him. Some incidents became notorious, whispered about in elite circles for years, and in 1992, broadcaster Tanya Breyer experienced an episode that would be remembered long afterward when, at a society event, Prince Andrew allegedly walked up behind her and unzipped her dress in public, and the stunned silence, awkward laughter, and shocked gasps that followed only seemed to elevate his sense of superiority, exposing not only a disregard for personal boundaries but a lack of basic decency that left witnesses appalled. This pattern repeated in subtler but equally cutting ways, and at a dinner in Windsor Castle he reportedly mocked an 18-year-old secretary, loudly declaring that her work was uninteresting and undeserving of notice, which for those watching was a display of power used solely for amusement, a stark reminder that in Prince Andrew's presence, respect was granted not through merit or effort but only if someone fit his narrow standards of value. Friends and insiders described sitting next to him as a test of endurance, with conversations frequently devolving into remarks about women's clothing or other trivial personal matters, reducing people around him to objects meant for his entertainment, and observers noted that Prince Andrew's behavior wasn't impulsive or occasional but habitual. Privilege wasn't merely an accident of birth but a lens through which he interpreted every interaction, shaping how he moved through events, dealt with colleagues, and sought amusement. And laughter in the room often came at the cost of someone else's dignity, a cruel equation where the powerful were entertained and the powerless were belittled. Yet beneath the arrogance lay a persistent fixation on appearances, status, and hierarchy, and every encounter became a chance for Prince Andrew to assert superiority and remind others of his elevated position, with women in particular drawing his attention in ways that were intrusive and objectifying, and he rarely faced immediate repercussions for such conduct. It was as though the weight of privilege could shield even the most indefensible behavior from scrutiny, leaving behind discomfort, frustration, and whispered accounts. Through all of this, a clear pattern emerges: entitlement applied without restraint, amusement built on someone else's misery, and a constant insistence on being the center of attention. And incidents like those involving Tanya Breyer and the young secretary at Windsor Castle were not isolated slips but signs of a wider worldview where rules, courtesy, and empathy were inconsistently applied, if at all. The shock and frustration these actions caused lingered far longer than any laughter they momentarily produced, and many wondered how such behavior could be tolerated, excused, or normalized within elite social circles. Ultimately, the portrait that forms is of a man defined as much by arrogance as by privilege, and from trivial demands to outright cruelty, the pattern is unmistakable. Prince Andrew was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted, and for him, boundaries, empathy, and discretion were obstacles rather than principles. In recounting these episodes, it becomes clear that the spectacle of entitlement left lasting impressions, not only because of what he did but because of the environment of compliance that permitted it and the people who endured it, often silently, while the world looked on. Even now, decades later, these stories continue to surface, shared quietly among social circles or recorded in memoirs, a reminder that the shadow of privilege can extend far beyond royal estates. And for those who encountered Prince Andrew, the memories are often uncomfortable, sometimes infuriating, but always unforgettable, illustrating the power dynamics and unchecked entitlement that shaped both his life and the lives of those around him. So how did unchecked entitlement allow Prince Andrew to move through power with impunity, influencing everyone in his orbit in ways few could have anticipated? When entitlement collides with consequence, the reality becomes clear. For decades, Prince Andrew navigated the corridors of influence with a sense of invulnerability, living in a world where privilege concealed behavior that would have alarmed any ordinary person, and those around him, staff, acquaintances, and the young women drawn into his sphere, quickly understood that his charm could turn harsh and his jokes were seldom harmless, instead sharp, intentional, and demeaning. Observers like author Andrew Looney described his antics not as the harmless quirks of royalty but as deliberate acts meant to provoke and assert dominance, a mixture of childish antics and entitlement. It wasn't mischief, it was a weapon. Accounts portray a man accustomed to having the world bend to his will, He became a man emboldened by the protective walls of the monarchy, where complaints were dismissed or discreetly buried, forming a long-standing pattern of behavior that for decades appeared untouchable, leaving staff afraid of retaliation, witnesses overlooked, and any notion of consequences non-existent in a world where power insulated wrongdoing and audacity thrived beneath the polished veneer of aristocracy. Jeffrey Epstein, whose name would forever be linked to scandal, once described Andrew as even more depraved than himself, calling him the King of Kink, a characterization that shocked some and confirmed the darkest suspicions of others. Yet despite all his boldness, the protective bubble surrounding Andrew was fragile and beginning to fracture. November 6th, a date now etched into modern royal history, became a turning point as King Charles, with decisive authority, stripped Andrew of all military affiliations and royal patronages, a gesture that wasn't merely symbolic but a formal acknowledgement that decades of privilege could no longer shield misconduct, signaling a public reckoning and a declaration that entitlement has its limits and the walls of royalty cannot conceal every wrongdoing. The revelations that emerged are astonishing, with accounts detailing Andrew's treatment of staff and young women revealing a consistent pattern marked by humiliation as amusement, exploitation as routine, and a hierarchy where his desires overrode ethics, with many who observed him in private settings noting a disturbing ease in how he exercised power, as behaviors that might appear eccentric or awkward on the surface often carried a far darker undertone. Staff found themselves trapped between fear and loyalty, while witnesses who might have spoken out encountered an impenetrable web of intimidation and social consequence, and each ignored complaint or brushed aside allegation reinforced his belief that he was untouchable. The public, now witnessing the culmination of years of whispers and half-heard rumors, is left grappling with fascination and disbelief, wondering how a member of one of the most scrutinized families on Earth operated for so long with apparent impunity, and the truth lies partly in the systemic protections surrounding him and the monarchy's instinct to safeguard reputation over accountability. The palace, in effect, fostered an environment where arrogance and entitlement were tolerated and at times encouraged, with the long-standing shield around Andrew enabling him to humiliate, intimidate, and exploit others while believing consequences were a distant abstraction. Yet November 6th shattered that illusion as the removal of his titles was not solely punitive but symbolic, sending a message that history would not remain silent and that documentation and testimony could outweigh privilege. And while Andrew's actions had been documented, reported, and quietly gossiped about for decades, the palace's inaction allowed those behaviors to persist, and the world could finally recognize that what appeared as arrogance or oddity was actually a deeply ingrained pattern of entitlement with real-world consequences for those around him. The broader implications are significant, raising questions about why more witnesses didn't come forward sooner and why the systems meant to protect the vulnerable were so slow to respond, as every account of Andrew's misconduct and every private humiliation he inflicted points to an almost systemic failure shaped by fear, power, and traditions centuries old. Yet the public reckoning now forces reflection, proving that the walls of privilege can collapse and even ancient institutions are not immune to scrutiny. And ultimately, Andrew's story becomes not just a record of one man's excesses but a warning about unchecked power, because entitlement, no matter how gilded, cannot remain hidden forever. The humiliations, the silenced complaints, and the carefully preserved illusion of invulnerability all converged into a moment when consequences finally arrived. And although many may still wonder what could have been prevented had action come earlier, the stripping of his titles on November 6 stands as a definitive statement that privilege does not excuse cruelty and history remembers. Now the question looms over what comes next, whether others will step forward now that this moment has emboldened them, or whether silence will continue to shelter the powerful, as the narrative of Andrew's entitlement serves as a stark reminder that even the most protected lives are subject to the reckoning of time, truth, and public scrutiny. And in the modern era, power may delay accountability, but once consequences begin, they can be unstoppable. So, what do you think gave Andrew the belief that he could degrade and control people at his parties for decades? We'd like to hear your thoughts, and don't forget to like and share.